And we are live. Hello, everyone. I'm Jessper Maquindang. If you're here to build a stronger team and a more effective company culture, you're in the right place. In each episode, we have guests that share tips, advice, and insights to help you and your people thrive. And I'm honored to introduce today's guest. Dr. Ann Bowers-Evangelista ignites passion, purpose, and clarity in executives and teams to build long-term success. She has leveraged her experience as a psychologist, business and leadership expert, and endurance athlete for over 2 decades to maximize human potential and business results. As a coach, Dr. Ann's reflective abilities and goal orientation help clients achieve outsized results. Her book, The Endurance Leader, was released in 2024. An Ironman triathlete and marathon runner, Dr. Ann brings her high-performance focus and results orientation to her work, family, and community. She has completed Ironman Lake Placid last month and raised over $12,000 for pancreatic cancer research. Let's welcome Dr. Ann Bowers-Evangelista. Ann, great to see you.
Great to see you too, Jessper. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely, great to have you. And I'm very excited about today's topic, this idea of endurance leadership. And I know there's a lot of research on it. I was curious to know, could you share some research and any statistics that are relevant to this field?
Yeah, I mean, there are so many, and it's sometimes a little disconcerting to see how much we're kind of going in the wrong direction generally in terms of what we're seeing in terms of engagement, stress, burnout, etc. The American Psychological Association does stress surveys all the time. They have a very big Stress in America survey, but they recently came out with some stress in the workforce survey information, and 70% of people, of workers, are saying that they're having significant insecurity because of their recent stressors happening economically with government, etc. 70% are saying significant stress at work. They're like 54% are saying moderate. So, 7 out of 10 people are experiencing significant stress. When we look at mental health in general, we see that 1 out of every 2 workers, people in general in the United States are between the ages of 18 and 35 are experiencing significant amounts of stress. So that's, 1 out of every 2 people in that age range are experiencing stress and having mental health kind of manifestations of that. Some other really interesting statistics, DDI does their global leadership forecast every year. And when they talked to leaders, they found that 71% of leaders reported significant increase in their stress since taking on their jobs. And over 50% of them were worried about burnout. And 40% of them were thinking about leaving because of the stress. And they survey tens of thousands of leaders, right? So we've got 40% of leaders at any given time who might be feeling so much stress that they aren't sure they can continue in their roles. On the other side, we know that research from Corporate Leadership Council shows that engagement, when people and leaders are engaged, higher profitability, 2x customer loyalty, right? So it's kind of like we're going in the wrong direction around what's happening to our leaders. And in fact, Gartner shows that HR leaders are saying that their efforts aren't as successful in terms of their leadership development initiatives. So we got to find some better ways. The systems we have for leaders and organizations, ergo organizations, to be successful with their people leadership, we need some new ideas. And I believe that the endurance component can really have value.
And those are very eye-opening. That's very eye-opening research that you just shared. And I was curious to know, especially with the first set of statistics, 70% experiencing significant stress. I wanted to get your thoughts and perspectives on, how it impacts you and your work?
Yeah, great question. Well, I will tell you that I live in Washington, D.C., so there is a lot of stress happening in our environment all the time right now. But what I see with the leaders that I work with in coaching work, in team development, I see people talking in language that you would understand as a marathoner, right? They feel like they are constantly sprinting. They are like, I never feel like I can really get a break. And even when they take breaks, when they take, vacation, they're so exhausted. They're so, undernourished physically, mentally, emotionally, that it takes them most of that week to even get to a baseline. There's no such thing as actual recovery in the way that we would think about it as athletes, right? It's like going from being really injured to like hobbling by and then starting again. And so leaders are really hungry for different ways to think, because they can't expect the organizations to change, right? The organizations, as we know, the speed of change is continuing and continuing. So what we need is different ways of thinking about ourselves, how we show up, how are we talking to ourselves, how are we talking to our teams and leading our teams.
That's right, the ability to adapt. And I was curious. I did research as well and wanted to get your thoughts on what I found. And something I found from Gallup, they discovered that employees reporting to leaders who do model stamina and persistence are 23% more engaged at work. Wanted to get your thoughts on that.
I mean, it makes so much sense. I will say that, when you think about stamina, when you think about pushing through, right, it takes a certain amount of discipline. It takes a commitment. And when leaders are exhibiting that, they are less likely to be doing things that maybe are not really great for themselves or for their team members. And they're modeling that way of being with others. Just a really quick example from a leader. Literally, we're having this conversation last week, and his theme right now is we're doing coaching, and he says say less. Like, that's his goal. And so in every conversation, he's trying to kind of show his commitment to allowing other people to talk more. He's allowing other people to have better ideas, et cetera. And as a result, he's not getting as tired, right? He's not getting as fatigued because he's always looking to himself to provide the answers. Lo and behold, he has more energy and his team feels way more engaged because they're coming up with answers. So it kind of, when you think about it in a practical applied setting, you can see how it makes sense.
That's right. And that segues to the next piece of research that I found. And according to the Harvard Business Review, Ann, wanted to get your thoughts. And they discovered that leaders who do practice resilience and endurance-based habits, for example, staying consistent, recovery, they are 21% more effective in achieving their goals.
Absolutely. I'm a little surprised that the numbers aren't higher. I would have hoped that number would be even higher. And I think that as people adopt and embrace this notion, I think it will be higher. In the book, I did research on endurance athletes and what I considered endurance leaders, people who had been successfully leading for decades. And we see this, we see the mental commitment, we see the endurance practices in all aspects of their life. Setting goals, as you talk about, like staying focused. What's the North Star? How do you stay focused on that despite obstacles and adversity? So it makes really good sense to me, and I hope that we'll have more people to survey and see that number keeps going up. We're a little frozen. Are we here? Uh-oh. Hello? I don't know what happened. Well, I'm not sure where Jessper went, so I will try to continue to keep going while he is not here. So I will talk a little bit about the book. The book, The Endurance Leader, which I came up with and produced last year in 2024, was really the brainchild of my experiences as an endurance athlete, as well as a leadership coach over decades. So I had recognized that there was a relationship between the kinds of things I was seeing from leaders, as well as those that were in the endurance leadership, in the endurance athlete space as well. So I'm going to pause and see if we get Jessper back. Such luck. I'll wait for him to. Well, I will just keep going. So the book is it's a model, a 4-part model around the kinds of qualities that I believe really distinguish effective long-term leaders and endurance athletes. So the first part is around forging. It's around anchoring your mindset. How do you actually engage in a mindset that's going to continue to keep you focused, as we were talking about a few minutes ago. It's around forging discipline. It's around excelling in execution and around leveraging support. The parts are not linear. They are interchangeable and they flow together all the time. However, it does seem to be critical to have the mindset element as the first part. So we are focusing in that aspect on trying to help people understand what's their ultimate mission. What is it that keeps people focused and engaged when they are the most challenged? And when we can see that somebody is anchored in something that is deeply, deeply moving to them, as Jessper would talk about too, kind of that purpose-driven leadership, it is really an incredible differentiator in terms of how they show up. Because what it does is it taps into your own intrinsic motivators. So the way I get people to really think about how you engage with your mindset is to really go be. I know that many people talk about knowing your why and understanding your why. I actually like the language of mission, because I think when you think about having a mission, you think about, going to the moon, going to Mars, right? This is this very long-term aspirational thing that we are engaged around. And so helping people identify and really define what that is. And those are often really values-based elements. They're not solely for, a particular. Hi there. I was just chatting with your audience. So I was talking a little bit about my 4-part model of my book.
Thank you. Appreciate it. But it looked like my computer shut down on its own, but we're back. So I'll get back to where we were. But another piece of research that I discovered was, according to nonprofit Running USA, they discovered that leaders who adopt an endurance mindset also experience greater purpose alignment and satisfaction in their role.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's actually dovetails really, really well with what I was just talking about, which is this whole first part of my book, which is around anchoring mindset. And you and I are so aligned around this, around like the purpose-driven elements of leadership. And, I think you talk about it as the why. I talk about it as having a mission, mostly because I think the language of mission is like, you think about going to the moon or to Mars, this bigger, higher order ideal self. And while I think that what might differentiate my model sometimes from others is that people really struggle with, how do I take that, I talk to people, what is that? What defines that? If people, wanted to say what what was great about you at the end of your life, what are the kinds of things you want them to say, right? I sometimes call that hugging your headstone. And, what I really think is important is that once people articulate it, they learn how to bring it into their day-to-day work. And this is where it's a lot like endurance sports, because an endurance athlete doesn't just go, okay, well, I want to do this marathon and then I got to kind of figure out how to get there. And no, we map out a very specific plan and all the elements along that, and bringing that mission closer in to your everyday life is going to ultimately be way more satisfying and motivational. So it makes perfect sense to me that these elements, when you have this endurance way of thinking and approaching things, is going to result in better outcomes.
Excellent. And I want to thank you for your resilience, pushing through that technical difficulty that I just went through. Excellent example of today's conversation. I may have jumped in while you were discussing your framework. Was there anything else you wanted to add for our audience?
Sure. I mean, that was just around the mindset piece, but I think, the other elements of that, and I mentioned them, were around excelling in execution, discipline, and support. And again, I think these are all things that you would recognize and talk about as well. But in the execution space, this notion of, setting your goals. Like I think you said something like, don't be afraid of a goal just because it's hard or you can't see it. Like, when we can take these things and break them into smaller parts, and often we talk about 1% change, right? Which is a great concept. It's also really important to recognize that learning isn't linear and development isn't linear. So it might be 1% change in one thing, but then you're going to get to a place where it's slower because you're better at it. And so then you might work on something else, or just recognize that you need some time to be able to adapt to your next level of training, of change. Then just real quickly on discipline, I think the biggest piece of that I think is really important is this mental toughness, right? Which is really defined as a mixture of hardiness, grit, and resilience. And when you look in the sport and performance literature, that's how it's defined. And so it's about like these things you're talking about, exercising a more resilient, kind of longer term way of leading a team, not getting, so caught up in the day-to-day that you aren't prioritizing. Pacing, right, as we would talk about it from a runner perspective. And then lastly, the support elements, which are, it doesn't matter what you're doing, whether you're an athlete, whether you're a leader, we are all in a team sport, right? Even endurance athletes are in a team sport. We're always calibrating off of other people and leveraging systems to help you stay calibrated, not only supported mentally, but also challenged, right? Find people who will challenge you to be your best self. And in that too is things like gratitude and being able to measure your success, which is also another way of creating support for yourself. So those are kind of some of the big anchor elements of the model.
Excellent. And thank you for sharing your framework. And again, I want to thank you for your resilience to push through that technical difficulty. Now, let's take a deeper dive into the topic,
Sure.
The idea of endurance leadership. And I'd like to learn more about your personal story. What gave you the inspiration to really jump into this field of endurance leadership?
Yeah, it's a great question because I was trained as a clinician. I came out of went into grad school thinking I was going to work with families in therapy. And so in grad school, I started doing consulting work and really loved it. And then along the way, I started doing endurance sports. And when I was coaching people as an executive coach and working in organizations, the parallels just started to seem really apparent to me. And so I think I first came up with the idea about 7 years ago, and started actually doing some interviews of people. And I really could hear the language that they use. It also wasn't a surprise, not that it has to be the case, but a lot of the endurance leaders were also people who were endurance athletes. They had that framework already embedded in who they were. So for me, it was a very kind of natural way to start putting these things together. Coming up with a framework was a little more challenging, but I could see that the structure and the bones of it were already apparent in the success stories that I was hearing on both sides.
And thank you for sharing your journey. And as we take a deeper dive into this topic, I was curious to know, we did look at the research, and there is a lot of research on this, but I wanted to really get more of your perspective into why people should pay more attention to this idea of endurance leadership.
Yeah, Jessper, I feel like, again, people are really in sprint mode because that's what organizations are requiring. And so we have to make some choices about how we are going to show up mentally in the face of that. It doesn't mean we can just tell the organization, hey, I'm not going to do what you told me to do because I'm going to take this different mentality, but we can think about it differently. So, for example, talking about sprinting, well, sometimes it's necessary to sprint, but I honestly think that organizations are not going to tell you, don't sprint all the time. You have to decide, when do we absolutely have to sprint and when can we take some recovery? Because it's impossible. That is what is leading to these just unprecedented levels of burnout. The other thing that I think is really important is, as much as we talk about the internal, mindset elements, this is not organizational language. They don't know how to talk this way. No one ever taught organizations to kind of prioritize leading self and how leaders should be thinking about themselves. It's like, do these things to be good leaders, but not the reflective element. So this is a missing piece, I believe, for organizations as they're trying to build better models for leaders to be more resilient in the face of all the changes that are here and are going to keep coming.
As leaders are adopting this new mindset, and I was curious, where can leaders start in really developing that endurance and resilience into the work they do?
Yeah, this is such a great question, because I would guess that almost everyone has some element in their life where they are kind of showing this kind of endurance, whether it's they already have a really good mindset and they know. When I have an assessment on my website, we'll talk about that. And people will ask them where they are in their mindset. And a lot of people say, yeah, they've done this work. So they've already done it. What I would say is, think about, if I could get just 1% closer to my ideal self at work today, if I know that I want to be known as, my team's best boss ever, what's one thing I could do today that might bring me closer to that goal? So I believe it's finding something that feels doable, right? If running a marathon, if you want to run a marathon, and you're kind of a couch potato, I wouldn't suggest you sign up for one in 3 months. Maybe you kind of sign up for a 5K, like in the 6 months. Start small. Start with some very small areas where you can focus your attention and say, how in my leadership, what parts of my leadership are going to reflect this part of my future identity, this ideal person I want to be? And what's one thing I can do in my leadership to be a little bit closer to that?
That's a good insight. And Ann, as a fellow marathoner, we build stamina by pushing through discomfort. What advice would you give to leaders to push through discomfort in the work they do?
Absolutely. That is where the whole mental toughness piece comes in. So, there's a little bit of, are you willing to challenge your assumptions? Maybe they're your assumptions about a coworker. Maybe they are assumptions about what has to be done. We've always done it this way. Maybe you need to challenge yourself to have more of a voice in difficult rooms, or as my client, less of a voice. Find something where you can push up against your existing boundary. And if you don't know where that area is, ask somebody who works with you a lot. They will help you. This is how we get better. Use the people around you as coaches, and they can help you identify where you might be playing it safe. So sometimes I'll ask a leader, where are you playing it safe right now? Where do you know that you could probably push? For a lot of people right now, it's even things like adopting AI. Like, how are we doing that? And so many people are like, no, I don't know. We're not dealing with it. But maybe it's like, let's bring in some experts. Let's talk to some people who are using a best practice. That is how we're going to build that strength and longevity, is continuing to push against our preconceived notions of what's possible.
And I really like how you mentioned the idea of reaching out to the people around us. And many endurance athletes do have coaches, nutritionists, support crews. How can leaders build their own support team in business or in the workplace?
Totally. This is, I think, especially over the past few years, I think this has been one of the most challenged things. While return to work has lots of challenges associated with it for people, I do think it can provide more in-person opportunities to do this. So what I like to tell people is take 2 questions and go ask these questions to 3 people who work with you a lot. First question is, what's one thing that you saw me do really well over the past month? Even if you can be more specific, what's one thing in my leadership or one thing in my communication that you saw me do well over the past month? And the second question is, what's one thing that you think I should focus on in the next month? Those 2 questions together are called Feed Forward. They are not my creation. They are Marshall Goldsmith, who is the world's most famous coach. But it really works because you just made that person a coach without, you didn't ask them to rate you or berate you. You just asked them for a little bit of feedback. No one's threatened by those questions. They took 30 seconds to ask, and you can get really good data that way.
Excellent. And I was curious, what are ways for leaders to communicate the value and importance of endurance with their teams?
It's so good. I mean, I think that one of the best things we can do is look at projects or initiatives where we've been really successful and where we haven't. And almost inevitably, you are going to find that when we haven't been successful, it's because the short-term thinking and the sprinting either caused us to move too fast, to underestimate some factors, to miss people's particular points of view, whatever it might be, kind of getting into sprint mode. And then when we can look at more successful efforts, it's often where we took time to gain support and talk to one another, where we pushed our boundaries of what we knew. So we exercised some mental toughness there, where we connected it in with the bigger vision we have as a team. And so let's just look at this. Let the data tell us why this would be important. I think that for most people, like if you just said, would you like to get out of constantly being in sprint mode? People would be like, yes, I would. But again, it's a mental difference more than it is an environmental one. So it's really about helping teams to recognize and then to build the right behaviors, the right sets of rewards and encouragements that are going to reinforce that longer term approach.
That's right, putting the right pieces in place.
Yeah.
And I was curious to know, as a fellow athlete, we have setbacks. I mean, I've had days where I was too sore to get back up. I've had days where I've had just bad training days where I didn't get as far as I wanted to go. Bad weather, you can include that into the mix as well. What lessons can leaders take, from the work, training and the work athletes do to really bounce back stronger after these types of failures?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I talk about failure. There's a whole chapter called Embrace the Epic Fail. And, how part of it is being able to recognize that there's no learning without some failure, right? You don't grow out of just continually getting better. Like that's not how it works. So failure, if you can see failure, is an opportunity to learn and grow. And an example I'll take out of endurance athletics and go to the military and look at their debriefing processes. That is where they always evaluate whatever thing they just did and look at it and really use it as a growth opportunity. So for all of us, one of the reasons we're so allergic to the word failure is because we appropriate it as an identity instead of an event. We tend to think I failed or I am a failure, rather than, you know what, my body was failing me that day. Like I could not actually make that happen. And so we over identify and we beat ourselves up too much versus saying, this didn't go the way we would have loved it to. Okay, how do we learn from that and grow from that? And sometimes it means, and you and I know this too, that on those bad weather days, sometimes you're out there in a race and, you know, it's a horrible, and you don't want to be out there. But that's why that internal motivation is so important, why that bigger picture anchor of mindset matters. Because when you have to dig deep, if all that's motivating you is your paycheck or the medal at the end of the race, you're going to be like, I'm done. Like, just somebody get me a water and a banana and I'm done. But, you know, you have to, you got to know what's really, really driving. And so, you know, I'm not suggesting you push past pain or, you know, things that are not in your best interest. But I do think that one is embrace it when it happens, but also when you don't feel like it. Like sometimes I say we just have to get over that don't want us. Like you don't want to right now, but your future self does want to. So make that choice.
Excellent. And Ann, when I reflect on our training, rest and recovery are so important. What does effective rest and recovery look like in business or in the workplace?
It should look like something more than what it looks like right now, because it's not very well modeled. And I'm sure most of our audience could be like, oh, that's 100% true. So one of the things that is so clear to me is that recovery in athletes is part of their training. There is not an athlete alive. You know, I love to ask people this question in keynotes and stuff. How many hours in 24 does LeBron James sleep? And the answer is somewhere between 10 to 12. Do you want to argue whether it works for him? I mean, we all know that, but it's built in. It is part of his training. And leaders don't do this. We see recovery as that vacation that we're just trying to like get back up to a baseline, instead of using it strategically and saying, I will turn my phone off at 8:30. I will not check emails. I won't check social media. I won't do any of it. Or I will get up 20 minutes earlier just to do some stretching or go for a walk. Like these kinds of disciplines, recovery is a discipline as well. And so too often people see it as like a luxury. It's not. And part of this is breaking what Brene Brown calls, overwhelm as a status symbol, right? So we don't need exhaustion as status symbol, is the word she uses. And so we need to figure out, what do I need to do? What are my best recovery? Maybe it's exercise, maybe it's time with, you know, friends or family, etc. You know, these things we have to figure out and make a commitment, and commit to somebody else because they will help you.
Absolutely, very valuable to be strategic about those decisions. And before we wrap up, what is the best way for people to reach you should they want to learn more about you and the work you do?
Yeah, thanks so much. So you can go to theenduranceleader.com and you can learn. You can take my self-assessment. Please do. Your name will not be, I'll get results without names. I'm trying to analyze all the data I'm getting, and it'll give you a sense of where are you on these 4 domains and where might you want to be spending a little bit more of your effort. There's also a link to the book. You can also email me at ann@theenduranceleader.com.
Excellent. And Dr. Ann, before we go, what is your final piece of wisdom for our audience?
You know, I think it's that leadership is a journey. And like any journey, we have to prepare for it well. We need to pack the right things for it. We should probably take some friends and we should enjoy it. In that, you know, if we're constantly trying to sprint, we're going to not only be unsuccessful, we're probably not going to enjoy the ride either. You know, so my feeling is just remember to have joy in your leadership journey. Like, try things, fail. I mean, within reason, fail, laugh at yourself, get some support, help other people, right? We're all in this together. So make it something that you really want to look forward to.
Dr. Ann, excellent piece of wisdom. And for everyone out there, thank you so much for joining us today. If you found some valuable takeaways, we do hope you do. And if there are any leaders who would benefit from this conversation, please share this with them. Last but not least, Dr. Ann, thank you again for spending time with us, sharing your thoughts and insights. Really enjoyed the conversation about avoiding that sprint mentality, building out resilience and endurance, and really taking time to find effective rest and recovery. So really appreciate the insights you brought with us today. So to everyone out there, thank you again for joining us. I'll see you in the next episode.